let's get started. I have, God, it's going to be hard not to yell. We have 30 minutes. I got a lot of stuff to get through, and so we're just going to jump into it. First of all, I'm impressed everyone found this. It's not on the schedule. The room is not listed. I'm shocked there's this many people here right now. We're going to be going deeper into the GraphQL announcement we made this morning during the keynote. So I want to first wet our palate here. GraphQL, if you haven't heard, is huge, and it's currently being used at a ton of different companies. These are to name a few. And it's implemented in most major programming languages today. Fun fact you may not know about GraphQL, I think it's common misconception it's like a technology, but GraphQL is just an open spec describing how to get data from a backend. It's an open spec, and everyone's implementing it in their own ways and following the spec. The more you know, great. So my name's Joe Karlsson. I'm a developer advocate here at MongoDB. That's my socials. If you ever want to get a hold of me, best way to do so is on my Twitter. I am very responsive on there too, so go check that out. I post a lot about JavaScript, Node, front-end performance, diversity in tech, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If I say anything stupid today, just note that it's just my opinion, not the opinions of MongoDB. Last thing, I have a QR code that takes you to this bit.ly link. I have a page on my website that lists all the resources and stuff in this talk, including source code, slide deck, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to be posting this over many times during this talk if you want to do that, but give that a quick pick if you want to go check that out. I'm going to hold it here. I still see phones taking QR code snapshots here. Wait for everyone to get that. OK, cool. Let's jump in. So before we get started, I want to do a little housekeeping. I do my talks a little bit differently than what you might be used to. But first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. I'm a developer advocate here. I'm paid because people come and hear me talk, which is great. So because of all you, I get my paycheck for the week, which is awesome. So thank you so much. Who's this for? So this is a getting started guide. This is like a 101. So this is going to be kind of introducing GraphQL, why I think it's amazing, and why you should think it's amazing too. I'm also going to be focusing more on JavaScript Node side, kind of front-endy kind of stuff, how you'd be consuming the data from the GraphQL perspective, as well as setting it up on MongoDB Atlas. But most importantly, this talk is for you. So if you're not in any of those camps, I'm a backend Go developer, I'm a DBA, cool. I think you'll still get some information about how this new awesome GraphQL feature works and how to use it. Quick poll. Who here has used GraphQL before? Who's consumed data from it or implemented a GraphQL server? Awesome. Yes, this is for you. Yes, great. Again, there's that link again. But this talk is like a 101. I'm going to be talking about GraphQL in greater detail than what Elliot talked about this morning during the keynote. OK, so today, what are we going to be talking about? First thing, I'm going to do a quick intro of what GraphQL is and why it's amazing and why you should consider using it on your next project. I'm going to be talking about Apollo. If you've never heard of it, it's basically a way that makes it easier to use GraphQL data. I see a Apollo person raising the roof back there. Or just silent disco dancing. That's it. Yeah. Got you both. Good. And we're going to be doing two things with our GraphQL endpoint set up by MongoDB Atlas. We're going to be making queries from that. And we're also going to be mutating data. So we'll be doing the full CRUD operations across with GraphQL on MongoDB Stitch. OK, cool. Let's just jump in. GraphQL, what is it? I don't know about you, but the first time I started learning GraphQL, it was a little intimidating. It's a lot. I know it's this thing that I'd heard about for a long time, and I didn't fully understand it. I feel like that happens to a lot of us in tech, right? You start hearing about these concepts and things. You know it's important, and you're meaning to be here. And I'm under the impression most people are here too to try to figure out if GraphQL is something they are interested in possibly learning or picking up here in the near future. And hopefully I can demystify it. But I think it's helpful to talk about GraphQL in terms of how we traditionally send data using a REST API, traditional representational state transfer API system. So I want you to imagine this scenario. Imagine you work for a company, you're a front-end developer, and you are implementing a feature that shows all of a customer's recent orders, and we're hitting up this API. This API returns, in this situation, a list of IDs or SKUs, right? Maybe it's a list of orders that this person ordered in the recent history. But hold up. Like on every project, there's a change in requirements, and actually, what we now is we want a hydrated list of all those orders. So before we were getting an array of the SKUs, those IDs of the orders that we were getting, now I want to get all the product information for all those orders. Okay, cool. So I'm a front-end developer. I have this new requirement. I need an API that will do this. I have to go to the back-end development team, and they have to go implement something to make sure I can get that data that I need. What's the best way to do this? Well, it's a hypothetical question, but there's a lot of different ways to fulfill this order as a back-end API developer. For example, I could make a brand new API called hydrated recent orders. Takes the same input, just returns hydrated product information. Or maybe I could do it like this, right? I could spell it differently, different ways of doing it. Or maybe I just do like a query string on the end of the original post that will optionally return hydrated data or not. I could even put things in the headers. I could do some additional crazy stuff. Point is, there's no consistent way as a backend developer to write that API to return that data. It's totally up in the air. And what you're seeing with the traditional REST APIs is, especially with front-end developers, they're making several requests to several different services built by several other teams. There's no consistency between them. A lot of times, as a front-end developer, I have to make several requests to separate things and wait for other data to come back before I actually display that data on the page. GraphQL works a little bit differently. So instead of hitting different REST endpoints where there's no rules, you hit one single endpoint. You request all the data you need from that single endpoint. GraphQL handles getting that data for you and returns only the data you requested from that single endpoint. GraphQL can be responsible for talking to all these different REST endpoints, going to all these different databases, doing all this different stuff, consolidating all together, and delivering one package of exactly what you asked for. The cool thing, too, is I mentioned it was an open spec. It means that GraphQL defines a consistent way for you to query that endpoint. I no longer have different ways of doing it. I don't have different teams with different REST APIs that have different documentation. It's one single way to get the data. OK, cool. High-level explanation. I want to talk about some key benefits, too, and we'll be digging into how MongoDB Stitch, or you can use those with Stitch. So let's jump in. So first thing, GraphQL is declarative. Much like how Michael Scott declares bankruptcy, he's not telling the bank or lawyers how to go through bankruptcy. He is just declaring it and expecting it to return what he asks for, right? GraphQL is the same way. I just ask for the things I need, and I can get those back. I don't care what server handles it. I don't care what team that comes from. I do not care at all. I just ask GraphQL for the data I want. GraphQL takes care of all the rest and just gives me what I want. Awesome. Super easy. I've worked on teams, too. I've worked on teams that use this at a massive scale with like thousands of engineers. It's super helpful for massive teams to do this, because I don't have to go track down the teams. Maybe this team has out-of-date documentation. This one has great documentation. This one does it differently than this team. No more of that. I can just go one place and get that data. Cool thing, too, declaratively. This is an example of how it works in real time. But you can ask for different data. And as a front-end developer, you structure how that data gets returned back to you. There's no longer, I have to like read the documentation, see what the structure is. I can ask for it, and GraphQL returns the data in the structure that I ask it for. I'm defining how that data gets returned back now. Awesome. With MongoDB, I'm just going to touch on this. You can use lots of different collections. For the sake, I have 30 minutes today. I'm just going to do a single collection, but you can use multiple collections and return massive amounts of data from different places in one single GraphQL request. Validated and structured. Awesome. APIs, very little structuring. GraphQL, there's a ton. So you saw this morning when Elliot showed you how to generate your schema. This allows you to control the shape and structure of the documents, similarly how you can do with MongoDB documents. Let's see here. All right, we can do this. I always keep a video backup in case my live demo crashes. But let's take a peek at this. So this is my GraphQL. Great. So this is a sample cluster I set up already this morning. I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but I do want to show you how easy it is to generate a schema for your cluster. First thing I'm going to do is load up rules. I'm going to give it 5 seconds before I switch to my video. And we're switching to our video. All right, great. Yeah. Is it going? There we go. So I have a collection with some documents in it. And if you can create filters and define your queries to find a subset of that data. But if you click that Generate Schema button, it just goes through documents in a collection, and it automatically generates the schema for you. That's it. Click a button. You can customize it, but it does a good guess of what you need. Cool thing about GraphQL, too, is you can define the data types that it returns back, which makes sense with MongoDB because you can define the data types for those different MongoDB fields, right? So it just uses those field types to define what that GraphQL schema type is as well, which are very similar to what you use with MongoDB out of the box. OK, this is my favorite part about GraphQL. Collaboration is massively improved by using GraphQL, and for a couple of key reasons. Firstly, it unifies all API endpoints. Remember the example I gave you with a bunch of different teams having their own different documentation and syntaxes for how they set up all that stuff? That's gone. Who cares? All your front-end developers now have to learn one way to query that data, and it works. They're just asking a GraphQL data point for their data, get it back. Done. Makes working and getting data from the back end so much easier. API versioning is actually considered an anti-pattern in GraphQL. You can decrement data or like depreciate data that gets returned from it, but actually it's best practice in GraphQL to just keep adding rules and resolvers to the endpoint and just keep getting more data. That data is still valid, but these are the new ways to do it. A lot of times you'll see API endpoints with like API-v2-, right? And you have to maintain those and communicate out when you depreciate. It's a huge pain. No more with GraphQL. No more writing documentation. This one is huge. I've worked, like Swagger helps, but it's really hit and miss when you're working with gigantic teams. GraphQL is amazing because out of the box you get graphical. And graphical allows a real-time view, like documentation of what's going on that GraphQL server. It shows you the structure and query and what's available from that GraphQL endpoint. So point is, you always have consistent documentation, and it's always up to date across teams. Always. Amazing, amazing. Let me show you. Blah blah. Here we go. So this is graphical. It's built into Stitch. I'm going to prettify this. Very cool. Allows you to do testing queries and mutations in the browser. This is how I, as a developer, structure my queries. I get real-time feedback, and I just copy pasta those into my applications. I can get insta posts. We'll turn all of them, right, an array. But this Document Explorer on the right-hand side of the page is a game changer for real. And let me show you. So there's two different things you can do with a GraphQL endpoint. You can make queries or mutations, and it shows you exactly how to do those. So I'm making a query here. I can query insta post, which is a single one that takes in that can return an ID, description, or image URL, and it requires the ID to make that query. Or if I want to make a mutation, which I'll show you in a second, these are the different types of mutations MongoDB automatically generates for you, basically all the different CRUD operations. But it shows you out of the box what those are and how to make them. Amazing, super helpful, always up to date. It's always querying what's available. If any changes are made, it's instantly shown here. Great. OK. Oh yeah, and graphical. Graphical is a game changer. Love it. We just went through that, so we'll skip it. One note here, I will say, I've heard this argument before that GraphQL is like, no, we don't need to talk to other teams anymore. No, wrong. GraphQL is not a replacement for communication across teams. I just find it makes it a lot easier and more consistent for developers making queries on the backend teams than a traditional REST API system. Okay, super fast. There's a little asterisk here. We'll get to the asterisks in a second. There are some massive performance gains you do get from switching over to GraphQL. So, no more overfetching. So let's say I want to just get some data about me. I just need a little bit of data. But I make a request to the backend API, and it's actually returning a 3 terabyte JSON file with way more data than you ever need. Has anyone ever made a request like that where they get way more JSON data than they don't even use most of it? Yes. Why is that bad? Well, the less data you send over the network, over the wire, the faster that's going to get to your client. If you can keep that package as small as humanly possible, that's going to increase performance to get to the client. The smaller that is, the faster it's going to get to the client. No more round trips. Has anyone ever had to make an API request so they go get some data, and then they need to go, and then they use that request to go make another request to another API, and then they get that, and they're going to make another one, right? That whole time, the user has to wait multiple round trips before that data can get loaded into the browser. That's a huge pain. If you can just get all the data you want in one go, you're good. That's great, right? GraphQL, you can do that. You can get one request, get everything I need, back. Awesome. This is important because for some reason, I don't know why, but the speed of light apparently we have not been able to figure out to transfer data faster than that yet. So that's a limit we have to deal with. And the more we can deal with that in practical ways, the better it is for us and the end users for applications. All right, so I remember I had the asterisk there for super fast. Great, one little note here. I will note GraphQL anytime, and I think we forget this generally in the front-end community, but abstraction at any level adds a performance cost that cannot be swept away, right? If you add React, awesome, cool, but that initial time of React has to get loaded in the browser, that's a performance hit you cannot go around with any amount of virtual DOMing, right? You have to deal with that abstraction cost. So there's a little bit more code, but if you're cool with that, you can see some massive gains otherwise in your application. Bottom line, GraphQL makes working with your data easy. Okay, so recap. What is GraphQL? First, we talked about comparing REST versus with a traditional REST API versus GraphQL. We talked about how they're different and how GraphQL is more consistent than a traditional REST API. We talked about a couple reasons why you should be considering using it. It's declarative. It's validated and structured using schemas. Facilitates collaboration across your team by unifying all endpoints on a single endpoint. No more writing documentation. We talked about how awesome graphical is. And no more API versioning. And then lastly, we talked about, bottom line, GraphQL just makes working with data easy. Cool. All right. So, Apollo, next step here. How are we doing on time? My clock is just flashing like crazy. All right. Yeah. Apollo. If you want to follow along, that's that link again to my site. I'm going to be jumping into some real code. My general philosophy in code in general and live presentations, most people's eyes start to glaze over if I get too much code. I'm going to be doing just a little bit of code. You'll be seeing practically how it works, I think is really helpful, but we're not going to be doing a full deep dive in anything, all right? So that's my personal philosophy on code in general. But I built a little Instagram clone, call it InstaPost, very creative, thank you. Basically just uploading a GIF and a description and saves that, and you can view that on DOM. All the source code is open, so you want to go check that out. Great, go for it. Cool. So we're going to be using Atlas with the GraphQL endpoint, and we're going to be using Apollo and React on the front end. So what is Apollo, you might ask? It came out of the ashes of the Meteor project. Anyone remember Meteor? Yep, me too. But they're doing some awesome stuff. Basically, Apollo is a wrapper for any front-end component. Can use anything, does not matter. But it basically handles the querying, caching, and retrieving of data from a GraphQL endpoint. It's a middleman. It's agnostic of whatever components or front-end framework you're using. I'm using React in this demo, though, just because I like React, right? Point is, it does a lot of cool stuff I'm not going to get into here, but Apollo just makes working with GraphQL a lot easier. Handles a lot of the hard parts for you. So how do we set this up? I'm bringing in, this is a React application in the front-end browser, and I'm just bringing in the Apollo link context and Apollo Boost. It basically, these packages, it tells you where the GraphQL endpoint is. That's all you really have to do. So we're importing those things in there. Another note here too, you have to authenticate all your GraphQL requests with MongoDB. You cannot make a request unless you're not authenticated. With my example application, I'm using anonymous access, so everyone can still get it, but you still have to get a unique access token to actually get that data. So this is the interesting part. You just tell it where that GraphQL endpoint is. I have a stitch ID here you get when you set up your new Atlas stitch application. Just plug that in, and that's your GraphQL endpoint. And then you link it up, you instantiate a brand new Apollo client. And this is the cool part. So once you've kind of told Apollo, this is where my GraphQL endpoint is, I need to link that data to my React applications. And the way we do that is with the Apollo React hook package. And all we do is we wrap the Apollo provider around our React application. So if you ever use like React Router or Redux, very similar, you're going to see like you just wrap that around there so all the components, all the children components have access to that data. Apollo can filter that down to all your child components. Great. OK. So what is Apollo? We talked about my Instaposts application, my Instagram clone. We talked about Apollo. How does it work? It's basically a wrapper for any front-end components. And it basically makes handling GraphQL data so much easier. It's awesome. We talked about how to set up Apollo with GraphQL. Key part here is you are just popping in your Stitch app ID and instantiating a brand new client, Apollo client. And then you wrap that client around your React application. Bada bing, bada boom. Your React application magically has access to all the GraphQL features, which we'll be getting to next. So obviously, we talked about how awesome GraphQL is. We talked about how awesome Apollo is. Let's talk about actually using it. We're starting with queries. Queries are obviously pretty easy. Mutating is a little bit more work. It's fine. We'll get there. But how do you do that? So MongoDB actually generates all of your queries out of the box for you. I showed that here. Right? If all of your queries, once you generate that schema, MongoDB automatically generates all the CRUD operations you possibly could want for you for one, all, many, whatever, super easily. So how do you construct a query? So you can see here on graphical, you're constructing these queries or mutations. How does that actually work? So there's two root types, which we talked about. And we're going to be making a query to begin with. So you're just saying the root type here, we're making a query. I'm not changing any data. I just want to get that data. If you are mutating, which we will handle in a sec, we'll deal with that in a sec. And then the second thing is what do you want to query? I want to get all of the posts for the homepage for my site. So I do Instaposts. And you can see here, I may just try to double up here too. Instapost, right? You can see here, I'm going to go back to mutation, schema, query, Instaposts. And then I click into Instaposts. And these are the arguments. This is what I can get back from that data. This is basically all the data in my schema that exists. Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know you could do that in Atlas. Cool. So you can say, what do I want to query? And then in there is where I define the data I want returned back from that request. So I just want everything, but you can totally pick and choose exactly what you need here. Note here, you can query multiple collections, right? You can do a lot of stuff. This is just a simple query we're going to do here, though. So what does that actually look like in practice when we want to make a component that queries for us? Again, there's an awesome React hook from Apollo called useQuery, and it allows you to pass in a GraphQL structured request. And we can do that using the GraphQL tag package, which I abbreviated to GQL. And the cool thing here is that the GQL allows you to use string tags to actually just copy paste that right in there. And you can just pass that into that useQuery Where's my mouse here? It's gone. Excuse me. You just pass that request into useQuery, and it'll make that request for you. One note here too. Whoops. I'm passing on a second optional parameter after the useQuery, the final insta post, and you can see that poll interval 500. That means it's going to be polling that endpoint, making a query every half a second. I'll show you that in just a second. And that returns data, and I'm just conditionally, using JSX, conditionally showing or hiding different divs depending on the state of that data. I have that loading data, error, and of course, if it succeeds, I get that data back from that GraphQL endpoint. I pass that through as props to the child component list page, which shows all those. So let's take a peek at this. I've got my demo over here. And you can see here it's actually, looks like it's, there we go. Every 500 milliseconds, it's making a query to that GraphQL endpoint. And we'll see that in just a second. But let's take a look here at, post. And maybe let's make this a little bit bigger so everyone can see it, huh? And let's check out the response. So this is the response I'm getting from that every, Apollo's sending back to us every half a second. And I'm just sending that data down to the child components, and I'm rendering that with the React components there. Boom, easy. I'm going fast here, I'm so sorry. We're getting through this stuff. That's my video backup in case this all failed. Awesome. Super easy. Again, Apollo makes working with GraphQL data super, super easy. So let's do a recap. How to make a query with GraphQL and Apollo. So MongoDB automatically generates all the different queries for you automatically. You can check all those out in Graphical. Amazing. Then you need to construct your GraphQL query. And we use it this way, right? You define if it's a query or a mutation. You define what you want, and then you define the data within that object that you want to get back from it. And then we showed how to use that useQuery React hook from Apollo. We just pass through that query to it, and we get back either a loading, error, or data state. And we can render those React components conditionally using JSX. Amazing. OK, last part here. We got like a couple minutes left. We'll get through this. Mutating data. So first thing I want to go through is constructing a GraphQL mutation. It's going to be very, very similar to constructing a query. I'm going to show you a couple of key differences here, though. So we're defining a mutation. This is new. You can define optional operation names for your GraphQL queries. Think of these as function names. Right? If you have an application, you're probably making a ton of different queries, and it helps to give names or context to them so they're easier to use or easier to understand what they are. You can do that with GraphQL here as well. So with mutations, unlike queries, you typically need to send data back to that GraphQL endpoint to make some sort of change. Right? This is where we're doing the full CRUD operations, where they're creating, editing, or deleting. You need to tell it either what you're deleting, what you're updating, or what the content is for that new thing that you're creating, right? So these arguments allow you to pass data through to it that you need to send back to the server so it knows how to do the thing that you want. I'm going to be creating a brand new insta post here. So we need to send through that data on there. The argument type is defined by MongoDB on there. You can check that out on there using Graphical. Yes, the bang, very cool. So you can enforce schemas or validate your data. This sends back very verbose error messages if someone does not if someone did not pass through data when invoking this mutation, it would give you a very specific complaint saying, hey, you did not pass through the required arguments. But the bang is like, hey, we kind of need this. We kind of need this. Next thing, the mutation type. This comes from GraphQL, and you're passing those arguments through to that function defined by GraphQL and MongoDB. And then here, you are telling the data or the server what you want back after you make this request. So after it inserts a brand new insta post into my MongoDB database, I'm saying, hey, could you send me the ID, description, and image URL when you're done? Great, right? So it's like, this is confirmation it's done. But I can also re-render that data on the DOM the second I get that back from GraphQL. Awesome. Here's a quick little how-to. I'll post this at the end too, of how to construct a mutation with GraphQL. So how do we do this here? I'm going to go a little bit fast for the time reasons here, but if you are interested, all the code is online. It's very similar. We're constructing that mutation using GraphQL tag. All right, we pass that through to use mutation, that Apollo hook, instead of a use query, use mutation. And then I just have a form on in React, and I have it on submit. It just invokes that use mutation and passes that GraphQL tag down to it. So when I click that submit button, it automatically just fires off that mutation to the GraphQL endpoint for me. And then in there, you'll also notice that data I'm sending back, because remember, you need to get that data. I'm just sucking that up from the form. I just say, I just get that back from that rel on the form. But wherever it is, you just need to pass that through as data on there. OK. And you know, I'm just going to keep using this too. It's kind of tricky. I have the poll, so it disappears quickly. But so when you post a brand new image here, let's see here. There it is. You can see that mutation. We caught that mutation in there. I create post, and all the data gets sent back to the backend server when it's completed. Amazing. OK, great. I have like a minute. I'm like 2 minutes over. If I've inspired you to want to learn GraphQL today, awesome. It's super easy to use. It's amazing. And there's a ton of benefits of using it. You should strongly consider using it next time you need to make a REST endpoint, especially if you're using Atlas. But I'd recommend just do it. Like, go home today, this weekend, whenever, and just play around with it. Set something up. The best way to learn it is to actually build it. Make a dumb, shitty app, play around with it, and just make something, right? Who cares? But set up a demo app. You could also try setting up this code as all open source. You can clone my stuff, set it all up, just get something working. It's amazing. So let's do a quick recap here, and I'll set you free. We talked about today, what is GraphQL? We first talked about comparing it versus a traditional REST API endpoint. And we talked about how there's no structure, a lot of different ways to do it. GraphQL, it's consistent, one endpoint, one way to do it. Question?
One question I have on the diagram.
Yes.
Is it doing some kind of database synchronization?
Is there some kind of data what?
I mean, data synchronization, how is it getting involved? Or is it kind of like some segmentation?
So how does GraphQL kind of orchestrate it? So if you can build your own GraphQL server, which is great too. But there's this concept called resolvers. And the resolvers are basically like, if I request this data, how do I go get it? So I can go out to another endpoint. I can make an API request. And you can define additional resolver logic besides the default logic that GraphQL gives you with MongoDB. But basically, the resolver says, if someone requests cats and these data, how and where do I get that data? You have to set that up. So yeah, you would define that if there's additional logic. Yes. Yes, GraphQL responsible for like, you have to tell it where to get that data. So quite, yeah. And we'll go, if anyone's curious about setting up additional resolvers, I'll do so afterward, just for the sake of time. I don't have time to do it right now. And then we talked about why to use GraphQL. So first thing we talked about declarative. Remember that Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy? You're declaring exactly what you want. I don't care where it comes from. I just care, I want this data, give it to me, right? It's validated and structured using schemas that you generate with Stitch. Facilitates collaboration a bunch of amazing ways. One, unites all API endpoints together under a single endpoint with consistent query style, spec, right? Normal writing documentation. Graphical is always up to date and always shows you what's available on the endpoint and how to get it. Amazing. This is a game changer for real. And then no more API versioning, anti-pattern using API versioning with GraphQL. Bottom line, GraphQL makes working with data ridiculously easy. We also talked about Apollo. Quick introduction to it today. And we started with Apollo by talking about my real life code here, which you can go view on GitHub. We talked about how Apollo is a wrapper around front-end components, and it makes working with GraphQL data ridiculously easy as well. We set up Apollo with GraphQL. Key here is you just plug in your Stitch ID, instantiate a new Apollo client. And then you just wrap that Apollo client around your application, and all the children components get access to that data. Boom, easy. We talked about making queries and mutations today as well. So MongoDB automatically generates all the queries you need out of the box once you generate that schema. All the CRUD operations, boom. That's a quick little thing for how to generate a query. And all you're doing is we use that useQuery Apollo hook, pass through a thing on there, and then we just take that data and render that in our children components. We talked about mutating data with GraphQL, constructing a GraphQL mutation, and then we implemented it with a React form and submitting that mutation to the backend GraphQL endpoint. We don't have time for questions, but I will be available here and in the back. I'm the huge hairy man with the man bun. I'm pretty easy to find. But also, I'm on Twitter. That's also the best way to get a hold of me as well. All the resources can be found here. If you want $200 in free Atlas credits, I gotcha. Just use that code and sign up there. There's a little bit.ly link there. You can sign up there. If you have feedback about the talks, please submit it here. I don't have any prizes for you, but they didn't make a slide deck for me too. But I love your feedback, good or bad. Please roast me. Please give great feedback. All helpful. And I just want to say thank you very much for joining me. Wow. Thank you. Great. I'm be here. If anyone needs me, come find me.